You're listening to the hexdevs podcast.
The podcast for the smart developer.
Antoine Ponsard, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you here. Thanks for coming.
It's my pleasure. Just happy to chat with you guys.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. So I grew up in France. I spent, the first part of my life there, around Paris. Moved a little bit around, and then I did my undergrad in France as well, at a school called École Polytechnique, which had a variety of sciences. And then I realized that I was really interested in computer science, and so that's what I studied. And I was also interested in design at the time. So I moved to Vancouver to do a master's in human-computer interaction, HCI, which kind of combines computer science and design. So that's how I'm here.
So what exactly did you like about design? Is the idea of creating something that people will really like to use? What was about design that most interested you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually discovered design through computer science because I did a class in web programming, and then I learned like this simple JavaScript stuff, and I was like, oh, it's really cool. You can just create a little web app and people can interact with it. You can have animations, all that stuff, and I was like, that's something that really attracts me. And I think there's a lot of similarities between user experience design and programming, because in both cases you're building something, right? You're creating something from scratch. It's just that the tools are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I asked that because usually, especially with backend developers, let's say, there is this misconception, I guess, that if you want to be a really good programmer or something, you really, I don't care about design at all. I just care about stuff in the back end. Or I don't want to deal with UI at all. I just care about my terminal and everything. But do you think that in the long term of building products for people, which is what we do as programmers, not necessarily if you are just a front end or a back end, do you think that if you believe in that, it's kind of harmful, like at the end for the user?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the size of the company. If you're a large enough company, for instance, Amazon, I'm sure they can have thousands of developers that are fully back-end, and that's just fine. And I'm happy that they're doing the work they're doing, because then we can use that to build products. But in a small company, I think it could be a problem if you have that mentality in a small dev team, because then the product you're building will most likely be flawed in a way or another.
And you're not going to have any users because your UX is terrible. So,
but your code is going to be so beautiful.
Yeah, like you have the fastest code, but your UX is terrible. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful backend, but with just a really ugly button.
So I think it's good that different people have different interests.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the flip side is true. We don't want front-end engineers to just care about the experience and write ugly code, because then it's going to be unmaintainable, buggy, all these things. I also think that nowadays with the front-end frameworks that we have, like React, these things bring a lot of complexity, a lot of power, but also a lot of complexity. And so I think the lines between front-end and back-end are blurring in that sense.
So it's interesting because you like UX and design, but you also have a background in computer science and coding. Do you think it's easier for you to design a good-looking interface with lots of usability, but also be able to code, Because I think it's an advantage, because you're not just, I'm going to create this little interface, but you also know about how you're going to create it, what is possible and what is not possible. So
yeah, I think it's a nice perspective to have. But I would say that overall, I think the mindset that you have when you're designing something versus programming, these two mindsets are very different. And so you really have to switch from one to the other. As a designer, you really need to be creative. Whereas as a programmer, at least the way I program is I kind of think about things in advance and try to come up with a good structure, good, hierarchy of components, this kind of stuff. I guess where you're also asking the question on whether it's a valuable skill to have like design and programming.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer to that I have discovered so far is that a lot of people say that yes, it is very valuable. They told me, oh, it's great. You can have this, these two hats. It's very unique. But in practice, I don't think companies care that much. Simply because the companies that need someone that can do both the coding and the design will be very, very small companies, right? And then it's okay if you're like a co-founder, but if you're working for them, you will just be part of a very small team. And as soon as a company grows to, like 20 people or so, they should have the resources to hire a full-time person in each role. Mm-hmm. So in my personal experience, I don't think having the two backgrounds helps immensely. But the part that is useful is that once you've picked your side, then you can communicate much better with the other side because you know like what language they use, what things they're paying attention to, things like that.
Yeah, in a context of a big company where you have the teams separately, I agree with you. But like, for example, if you want to build a little side project or, other stuff, that's definitely like really, really nice, right? Or it's also good, let's say that you don't want to work just as a programmer anymore. You can also try, I'm going to take a break of programming. I'm going to just do the designing. I think it's good.
Yeah, definitely. And I've thought of I could do my own company, my own startup. If I find a business partner that can handle this side of things, then I can create the product experience. But right now I'm happy with coding most of the time.
Yeah, so now you are working at Asana, right? Can you just give a little bit of introduction about what do you do there? Why did you decide to join the company?
Sure. So Asana is technically called a work management software. So it's kind of a new category of software, of SaaS apps. In the past, you had things that were more like for planning projects, where typically you have one project planner that uses this very complicated tool, right? The idea of Asana is that everyone in the company should manage their work together. And so each person has their own account. They have tasks that they complete and comment and discuss on these tasks. And of course, we also have some views to help coordinate, so grouping tasks into projects, having timelines for completion, all these various ways to get a sense of what everyone is working on in your organization. So it started in San Francisco. It's actually pretty old. It started, I think, 10 years ago. So the two co-founders came from Facebook, where they developed a task management tool inside Facebook. And they were like, oh, actually, this is, really useful. And they decided to make it their own company. And so in April of this year, Asana opened an office in Vancouver. And so I joined as the first batch of hires here, which was a fun experience because we were like very few people, maybe I think 10 or 11 at the beginning. So, we're just in a WeWork and creating a new team from scratch.
Nice. So why did you decide to do a master degree? And how was the experience of doing a master degree in another country, you know, in another language? How was the experience for you?
So I had a lot of fun in my master's. I think the biggest difference was that as a grad student, you were treated very differently than an undergrad. Undergrad, you're in your classroom, you know, the teacher kind of tells you to do things and you do them. As a grad student, especially since it was a research-based program at UBC, so you're working kind of closely with your supervisor to do research projects, and your classes are typically in smaller groups, and yeah, the context in which you're learning is very different. I also really liked that we did a lot of projects, whereas in France I felt like in my undergrad I didn't do as many projects, so that was great. I had some good friends during my master, and you know, we started our friendship by just working hard together on these projects. And it was a very interesting topic. It's a very broad field. Now the question is, did it really help me in terms of, you know, becoming a better programmer? That could be debatable. A lot of people just do an undergrad, and that's probably all you need to get a job as a software developer. But still, I'm glad I did this master, because I think personally it brought me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What kind of projects did you do?
Yeah, so one thing I can explain, maybe it's gonna be hard without drawing, but okay, so you know, in your computer you have settings or preferences, right? And they all look pretty much the same. You have a list of checkboxes or drop downs, and you can choose some values. It's very consistent across many different types of apps, but it kind of sucks as an experience because it's very different from how you normally use these apps. So there's no good mapping between the two. You have to read these text labels and try to figure out what they mean, whether they're going to do the right thing or not. Sometimes you don't even know if what you want to change is changeable, right? So my project was to try to come up with a more visual representation of these settings so that you could more directly customize what you see on your screen when you're using an app. And so my prototype was to, when you're looking at an app, instead of opening settings, you would just turn on a special mode, a customization mode, where you would see little markers on all the elements that could be changed. So like if you can show or hide a certain button, right? Or then you would have a marker there with, and when you click on it, it shows you only the setting that applies to that button. Same thing for keyboard shortcuts. They're mapped to the equivalent button in the UI. Things like that.
Seems like you really enjoyed.
Yeah. And the coding part was actually really fun because I did it on the web. And there was an app at the time called Wunderlist, also a task management app. And yeah, so I just used them as an example. And so my prototype was essentially injecting a little script in the app to take over the UI and do this customization.
So what kind of technologies did you use?
So back then, that was about 4 or 5 years ago, I used AngularJS, Angular 1. Wunderlist itself was built using Backbone.js, which is even older. But, you know, it works.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that some people, they are thinking about pursuing a master degree, but then they feel like, oh, you know, it's really outdated. I will not learn a bunch of practical stuff. So in that case, it seems like it was a really practical degree one. Which one was it again?
So it was a master's in computer science with a specialization in HCI.
Right. So did you move to Vancouver specifically because of that course or not?
It's for a combination of factors. One of them is I wanted to, travel. I wanted to discover a new place. I wanted to improve my English. So I had to go to an English-speaking country. I thought North America would be a good place just because computer science is so big here. So I applied to a bunch of places, and I guess one of the deciding factor was that I got a scholarship at UBC, which obviously helps. And also they flew all the prospective grad students to Vancouver to visit the campus. And I was like, oh, this is very nice.
It is. It looks like,
yeah. And I had good contact with the professors there, so I thought it was a great choice.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Yeah, so when I was doing, because I did a master's too in computer science, and I feel like my master's was more theoretical a little bit. But then I learned a bunch of things that I wouldn't be able to learn on my own, probably. And so some of the ideas and the techniques that I learned in the past, I think that I still use them a little bit. Like, not the specific technique, but the ability to learn how to learn and apply new things. So do you feel that way too? Do you think it was useful to you in your career? Do you think you still use things?
Definitely. Definitely. One of the things is that I learned how to write papers since it was research, right? Academic research. And writing papers is very difficult because you work on this project for an entire year and then you have to condense it on 10 pages, and it has to be absolutely crystal clear, extremely concise. And so I think it's a great way to train yourself to communicate well. And so that definitely helps when you're writing technical design documents, stuff like that. Another thing is presentation. Same thing, you need to present at your conference. It helps you to get comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. From a technical point of view, I learned on my own, for instance, AngularJS. So I learned how to be resourceful in terms of programming, which is good. From a theoretical point of view, I didn't learn that much, except for, I guess, theory in human-computer interaction, which is very specific. But yeah, I do think a master is an interesting experience, and it's definitely useful in fields that require advanced knowledge. So if you're doing, of course, data science, machine learning, it's great. If you're doing security or any sort of embedded systems, you'll likely need more than an undergrad worth of knowledge for these fields.
So how was the process of registering for the course, like getting the scholarship? Let's say that someone that is listening to us right now is thinking about applying for a master at UBC or I don't know, any other university here in Canada. Do you have any tips, advice?
Good question.
Yeah.
For the money part, I think in general Canadian universities are cheaper, significantly cheaper than American universities, and some of them are very good. So just some names: so University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, UBC, and I always forget the one in Montreal. But anyway, there's a good one in Montreal.
I don't know the name.
Just very good school, and they will be more affordable than the equivalent in the US. Another thing is, so here, these research-based masters, you're kind of paid as a teaching assistant or graduate research assistant. So that helps. At UBC, basically everyone in the master's program in computer science get this this funding, right? It's not huge, but it's nice. In terms of application, it was kind of a standard application. You need to practice to do well on the little tests and stuff. Writing a good, it's not a cover letter because that's for a job, like the equivalent when you're applying for university. I did spend a bunch of time kind of like looking at what the different profs were working on, and I tried to pick at least one project that I found interesting. And I mentioned, you know, I would be interested to work with Professor X. I liked how they did blah in their paper, blah, right? And I think we could possibly maybe try this other approach. So I think that's a good start. Yeah. Aside from that, Canada is very easy in terms of immigration and things like that. So.
So can you talk a little bit more about the scholarship? Was it like a UBC scholarship, or was like a France-Canada relationship?
The scholarship I mentioned is the fact that you get funding through. So the way it works is that the computer science department guarantees you a certain amount per year, which was something like $20,000 per year. And then they will provide it to you either as a teaching assistant or as a research assistant, or if you can't find any of that, the government will step in to provide it. But it's very likely you'll find either of the other two.
Interesting.
So I saw that you were part of a group, I don't know, called Girls Smarts for Tech at UBC.
Right.
And I thought it was pretty interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was, I guess, a tutor for this organization. The idea is that to make computer science more diverse, it's good to get kids excited about it, especially before, you know, stereotypes will come into play. And so Girls Smarts is, I don't know how old it is, an association that brings young girls, so I forgot which grade they are in, but pre-teens basically. And you have a day on campus at UBC on a Saturday where they go through different workshops through the day. And it was pretty diverse, pretty interesting. So they even had like a 3D printing workshop, the usual like front-end development workshop, and I guess something a little more computer science-y. And yeah, the idea is so that they get exposed to how fun it can be to program and play around, and hopefully in the long run it will spark an interest.
Okay, so with the master's degree, I assume you got here with a student visa, right?
Yep.
But then how was the process of migrating from a visa student to a work permit or something?
So at least in my time, it was very easy. You automatically got a work permit after your study permit as long as you completed your degree. And if you did an undergrad, you got 2 years work permit. And if you did a 2-year master, you got a 3-year work permit, which is what I got. And it's an open work permit, so you can work for any company. So yeah, it's great. And after that, it was fairly easy to apply for permanent residency because after a year of work, you have all the points you need, basically.
Good to know. That's really good. Makes a lot of things easier.
Yeah, and it's, again, unlike the United States, when after you do get a work permit after, or a work visa, but it's not gonna lead to anything unless a company is willing to sponsor you. So that can be quite difficult.
Nice. I didn't know that.
So getting back to your work at Girls Smarts for Tech, so I am really fascinated by this problem of tutoring young people or like mentoring junior developers. I think it's really important for a person, like if you want to be like a senior developer, it's really important to mentor other people, coach other people, because it's a really effective way for you to learn more and learn how to communicate with people better in a better way. And also the stuff you said about like being writing well, and I think it's really important for a programmer or developer to be able to write well and express ideas in a clear way. And do you think so how was your experience tutoring young people? Was it hard? Do you think that like when they're young they're more excited about things and they learn faster? So how?
That's a good question. I don't think this particular Girl Smart experience was very relevant to your question, because it was kind of just a one-day workshop and we had planned it very well in advance. So it was mostly like going through the steps of what they have to complete. But I think in my work I've had to explain various things to other more junior developers, and so I've definitely felt what you were describing. I very much believe in the idea that if you can't explain something clearly, it means you don't actually understand it. So it's a good test of your own knowledge. I think a big thing is whether you can be excited about what you're describing or not, and typically that's contagious. If you're excited, they'll get excited about it. I think another trade-off I've had to make, especially with co-op students, is how much do you provide to them versus have them figure out on their own, right? Especially in programming, we want people to be resourceful. We want them to first check Stack Overflow, if possible. And so I always... I guess my approach is that I think in some cases it's good to provide an overview of some of the key concepts so that they have a foundation of how things work at a very high level and what to look for. And then I let them struggle a bit on their own, trying to sort things out. And then maybe at the code review stage, then you can come back, give some more detailed feedback, help them grow.
Have you had the chance of mentoring other junior developers in your current work or in your previous work?
Not in my current work, because we were all hired at like the intermediate kind of level. But in my previous company at Hootsuite, we did have one co-op in my team and also 2 junior developers. So I think it's probably part of the fun of being a developer, is to be able to work with other people and work with more senior people that you can learn from and pass it on to more junior people. It's great when you see them achieve something impressive, right? Like especially for co-ops, they come out of school, they've learned things in a very constrained environment, and then suddenly you're like, hey, JavaScript, React, go. And at the end, they're really talented. Like they could contribute just like any other developer to the team.
Yeah. And it's kind of something that will resonate in the future, right? If you onboard people right, especially in their first years of experience, if you are excited about sharing your knowledge and you making them feel excited, they will probably do that with, the other juniors as well. So I think that is something really nice to hear another developer saying that.
Right.
Because I feel that at the end, that's beneficial for the community. Like, of course, everyone can go and read the documentation, let's say. But if there is someone that already went through a lot of pain with something, and you find someone that says, hey, so I actually figured out a better way to understand this. So, you're making life. Yeah, you're making the process easier for everyone, right?
That's true. And it's not just junior people who have to learn, right? Even for us, when I joined Asana, there was a lot. Even though we're using React and TypeScript that I knew, there's still a lot of particular knowledge that you need to gain. And so this skill of explaining things is useful at any level of your career, I think. And so, the process at Asana was very thorough. So we have this concept of the coding bootcamp. So you go to bootcamp for 2 weeks. You're given like a very basic project to work on, and also a lot of different classes throughout these 2 weeks that will teach you kind of like the different aspects of our code base, and there's lots of internal tools and systems that you learn about. And so really at the end you get a good sense of how things are working. Another thing that I was very impressed by is they actually wrote documentation, in Markdown files in GitHub. So it's very easy to search and navigate, and it really helps when you have someone actually explain with words how things are working, rather than trying to read, tons and tons of files until you can piece it back together.
Yeah.
And that's actually pretty cool. Like the idea of having a 2-week boot camp, so you can onboard yourself to the company. That's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, it happens because so in the past it didn't work like that. In the past you would join a team and your team would help you kind of get started.
Wait, sorry. Was that the interview process, or was that the onboarding process?
That was the onboarding process.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, your first 2 weeks. My first 2 weeks at Asana.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was a way to kind of scale up onboarding, because we now hire, I don't know the exact numbers, but a lot of developers every month, and so you need basically a mini university to get people started. And I think also Asana is probably at the scale, I think we just passed 600 employees, and so I think we're still at the scale where you can have a sense in the team of what people are working on and what the whole infrastructure looks like. But I'm sure once you pass, couple thousand people, probably the level of complexity is just too big, and most people won't be able to have this bird's eye view on the tech stack.
And so, as you said, that Asana is growing up really fast here in Vancouver. So I assume you are hiring for a lot of openings.
We are, yeah. So we have, I'm not sure exactly what we have on our website right now, but we're definitely hiring for engineers. So if you're interested, talk to me. I assume there'll be a way to contact me. But otherwise, if you just Google Antoine Ponsard, people will find me. And I would highly recommend it as a good place to work. So there's lots of good things about this company, I guess. One of them for me is that I care about the product, because it's about making people productive, right? And that's something I like. The fact that we use it every day at work, it's nice to see the improvements that your code is making, right? And in terms of culture, it's very mature, as I would describe it. It's definitely not like, we're all bros out of college. A lot of people have partners, families, so it's very nice and genuine ambience.
Cool. Getting back to the culture, because like when you said, we have lots of documentation, we have a nice onboarding process, but like someone has to go there and write the documentation. Someone has to figure out a way to onboard people. And I think when the culture is a good culture, it kind of influences people, so they do things better. So they do things properly, and they are also nice to each other. So do you think that the culture kind of influences your work a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think Asana has been very careful about its own culture. It's very like reflective. I guess I could come back to that, but for the specific case of documentation, I think so. One thing that helps is that we have this concept of sprint days. So for every 2-week sprint, you'll have one day that engineers can spend on other work. So it's work that's useful for the company, but not kind of directly something that, for instance, a product manager is asking you to do. So people typically, improve our tools, improve documentations, fix like little bugs here and there that are not prioritized otherwise. Refactor something that was ugly in the code, but you couldn't have the bandwidth to do. And so I think it provides, a little bit of breathing room to make things just much better overall. And on the question of whether the culture helps that, I don't know, we have a principle that says, fix problems even if they're not yours, and people largely follow it. Yeah, and I do think overall people are very, as I said, they're nice. So you wouldn't want someone else to hit the same problem as you, or to be annoyed because you wrote something that's just not working great. So that definitely helps.
And did you know about, did you study a little bit or talked about someone from Asana before starting there? Or it was just something that you find out after you joined the company?
Good question. Yeah, I definitely think researching a company is a good idea before joining it. Highly recommend. So what did I do? First off, so one of my friends got contacted by Asana, and he was not interested at the time, so he kind of passed it on to me. And I had a chat with Niranjan, who's the manager of the Vancouver office, when he was starting to look for hires here, and our first contact was very good, so I had a good feeling from the start. And then I went through the process, and I looked for things like Glassdoor. Glassdoor has very good ratings. I think it's maybe 4.8 out of 5, which is really impressive. I found through some network someone who already works at Asana, and I had like a quick chat with them just to check that it's not fake reviews on Glassdoor and people are actually happy to be there. Aside from that, I think you can also get a sense when you're interviewing. My interview process was pretty difficult, but the interviewers were always very good at making you feel comfortable and not like pressuring you, not being like mean or stuff like that. So I had overall a very good feeling.
Are you talking about RJ?
Yes,
yeah?
I was in an interview with RJ, who's another manager.
Okay,
yeah. It was actually, so there was Denise, who's also working here as a software developer. She was conducting the interview, but since she's junior, RJ was present in the room to kind of like, I guess, help her out and make sure it goes well.
It's because I met him at the Polyglot conference, and it was on this. I met him on this talk about starting your career in software development, and he was really nice. He offered some help because at the time I was trying to find a new job here in Vancouver. Yeah, so he's a pretty nice person. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the kind of person you want as a manager, right?
Yeah.
Someone who actually cares about other people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of difference. That's true. I've been saying that I feel really fortunate that the two fintech experiences that One that was in Brazil was at Magnetis, and here in Vancouver at Lendesk. It has been only my first week, but I definitely feel that the impact of a good culture. Like you feel like the whole company put a lot of effort into the documentation, into the onboarding process. Of course, it doesn't matter if it is a really good onboarding process. You always can like improve it, but when you feel like your input will be added like to the next person, that is really, really nice. Yeah, the culture is really important.
I do think I believe in improvement in general. That things and people can improve, and I think it's important to be around people that have the same mindset, that take feedback and are just excited about whether something can be made better. And that's something I found. The way people communicate at Asana is pretty good as well. I haven't witnessed like any fights, any people being like getting in heated arguments about things, or just making some sort of mean comments on your code or conversations. So yeah, it helps. But it's a great question on how can you create this sort of culture and maintain a culture in a company. I think for us, since we are growing quite fast in terms of new employees, there's this challenge, right, on making sure the new employees will also adopt the same kind of values. So yeah, that's an ongoing effort, as you were saying, as a company.
I think that if you feel that the company is open to feedback, that's already a good sign.
Right.
Like it says a lot. Yeah. But if you feel like if you have been saying the same things all over and over, maybe it's time to find something else.
Right. It's true. You're right. The first step is to be open to feedback, but also the second step is to be able to change based on feedback, which is hard when you are like just so many people to coordinate and everyone is busy with their own role. So that's another challenge as well.
So talking a little bit about the stuff you're doing now, you are working on the product. Can you tell me what sort of things you do? Like, do you develop? Do you do React? What are you doing
Sure.
right now?
So our tech stack is a React frontend in TypeScript. So we're very strong in like using a good type system, which is powerful. We load data through something that's kind of like Apollo GraphQL, but it was built in-house kind of a while ago. And so it basically takes care of everything for you. You just declare what data you need, and it will load it. It will keep it up to date whenever something changes on the server. So it's actually very powerful, and we have a system of mutations where you can just send what updates need to be made. So as a result, a lot of the backend work is kind of automated or abstracted away for you. So for instance, we can define a new, when like in an SQL table, you would have to add a new column for yourself. Here we can just edit a definition file that we write in TypeScript, and then it will, there's still a bit more work, but it helps a lot in moving faster when you're making any sort of data model change. In terms of product, so I'm a product engineer, so I will do whatever is needed to get a certain feature built. And so far in these first few months, it's been mostly on the front-end side. But we also have a Scala backend that we use for doing any sort of computation. So, like a big query that needs to do some sort of math and then return you the result. So you'll write that.
Can you tell me about a feature or something that you've built and you thought, oh, hey, this is cool, so I'm proud of this. Can you
Right.
give some details?
So I've been there for only 5 months, and the biggest project that I've worked on is not released quite yet. It's gonna be released in a month. So in a month you'll see. It's gonna
Nice.
it's gonna be cool. My onboarding project after the bootcamp, my onboarding project was a conversion. So we had an old framework called Luna 1 that was also built in-house. That was not React, not TypeScript. It was before even React came out, and they had basically their own framework for doing front-end apps. And it was cool at the time, but since then, we've seen opportunities for improvement, and React brings a lot of benefits. So there's a big push right now to get all this old code out by, I think, the end of the year. And so as a new hire, it was a good onboarding, I guess, practice project that's still being useful for the company to do that. And so I converted basically the dialogue where you can change your name, profile picture, like about me, this sort of stuff.
Cool. And so you kind of changed the code to use React now? Is that
Yeah.
it? Oh, cool.
And the new data loading system. And it was fairly straightforward, but I think it's a good way to just practice, making sure you've learned everything. There was we have a little toggle that can let you set when you're on vacation and for how long. And it was surprisingly tricky to figure out all the different cases. Like, what if they say they start their vacation, before, or like this? What if the end date is before the start date? What if the end date is before today? And all these kind of little details. But anyway, after that, I moved on to, we now have like a team fully formed, and we're working on our own big project, which is cool. The idea is that the Vancouver team is a fully formed product team. So we have, 2 PMs, designers, UX researcher, data scientists, so that everyone can work together. And that definitely helps in terms of communication and getting things smoothly out of the door.
It looks like the Asana team,
Yeah.
they build their own tool. So you told me that, we have this tool that was used for the front end instead of React, and then there's another one on the back end that kind of helps with writing data access queries and stuff like that. Can you give me more details about that? Like, do you have like a infrastructure engineering team that works on that kind of stuff?
And the reason why these tools were built is that I think since the company started 10 years ago, a lot of the things we're familiar with today were not really there yet. Like Node, NPM was just getting started. And at the same time, Asana, as an engineering organization, was always very forward-looking. So one of our big engineering goals is to have everything be reactive to changes. So if someone changes some value on their own browser, it should immediately reflect on your own. And nowadays with tools like Firebase and React, it just almost kind of magically works. But 10 years ago, it was hard to do. And so they definitely had to build a lot of infrastructure around that. And same thing for our GraphQL data loading mechanism. It was developed before GraphQL was developed and released. It's definitely, I guess, part of the engineering culture to have big goals and to build for them. But for instance, they did adopt TypeScript and React, and I think that was a great call, right? A good bet on the technology. And we do have various teams. We have one that's very infrastructure oriented, and we have one that takes care of the client side, so the data loading framework. We have one that's more organizing the DB side of things on the back end. Yeah, and their goal is to make the product teams as effective as possible.
That sounds really cool. And do you have some autonomy to work on those things? Like you said, you have a day every sprint to work on something that you think it's important. Do you have lots of autonomy there?
Yes, so for the way you use this one day, it's, as far as I know, it's entirely up to you. But of course, you're encouraged to do something that is going to be useful at the end of the day. So the way it works is that we have basically people are responsible for certain areas. We call them AORs, areas of responsibility. And so someone is the AOR for data loading, and then there might be some sub AORs for like more fine-grained details. And so these people just make sure there's no bugs and things like that, but they can also ask for help. They're like, oh, I would like to build this, I don't have the time to do it. And so then maybe a new engineer like myself could say, oh, I'm interested in learning a bit more about this aspect, right? Database management. And you can work on it. Aside from that, you can also pick, we have a list of like bugs or like little improvements to make here and there that just haven't been prioritized that you can pick from. If you're passionate about something, say accessibility on the web, then you can just go and make sure our web app is as accessible as possible. Another thing I've noticed is in terms of dev process, so during your regular dev program work, you generally have a lot of autonomy as well. The tasks are pretty non-specific. So the goal of the task is clear, but the way to get there is up to you. And so you can figure your way out, you can ask for help, but it's up to you, which I found pleasant to work with, right?
That's so much better when you have some autonomy to make your own decisions, and if you see something that you think could be improved, you have some autonomy to fix it, make it better. So yeah, it's very pleasant to be able to do
right. But you also, I agree with autonomy, but you also need the checks and balances to make sure someone doesn't do something and maybe doesn't realize some negative impacts that it might have. And so that's why we have these AOR people who are going to review your code and make sure it makes sense. We have a file in each folder of the code base, and so whenever you make a change to this folder, it's gonna automatically add these people to the code review, and so they'll keep an eye on what's going on in their part of the code base.
Nice. And so, how have you been enjoying Vancouver so far? Do you feel like you are completely adapted, or?
So I've been there for 6 years now, so it's actually a long time. It's longer than most other places I've stayed at during my life. So yeah, it's definitely feeling very familiar now. I think you would agree that Vancouver has a great quality of life. It's very impressive. So the city is very safe, it's very clean. Obviously the outdoors are impressive, and you just can't have that in most other locations. The weather is pretty good. I don't know why people complain so much about the rain, but
me either.
Yeah, I come from Paris, and like there's also rain in Paris, and there's clouds and stuff like that, and that's not that bad here. It's definitely not as cold as Toronto or a lot of the East Coast, so I'm glad for that. I would say overall people are pretty relaxed. I had some friends from Paris who visited us, and they said there's a huge difference between the SkyTrain in Vancouver and the metro in Paris. So the metro in Paris is great because it goes everywhere and it's really fast. But it's also just very packed, kind of dirty. In the summer, it apparently get really, really hot. And in contrast to that, the SkyTrain is like, it's a pretty modern system, right? It runs on time. Sure, it gets packed during rush hour, but that's only like half an hour every day, possibly. So it's really not that bad.
Yeah. Coming from São Paulo, we definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's true.
How is the public transit in São Paulo?
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very bad. Like Vancouver is the paradise for at least for public transport. It's just great. It's awesome. So I want to ask you about the stuff, maybe the future. Like, is there something that you're learning or that you want to learn about, like software development or anything that you want to share? Something that you're excited about?
Great question. I'm always curious to see what the latest release of React will have, because it's great to see how thoughtful the React team is at improving this platform. I'm personally hoping for React to continue being, kind of a big unifying framework that many people can use. And for the same reason, I hope that React Native is gonna be great. I'm waiting for the 1.0 release of React Native, because I would love to be able to code on mobile more easily. And from a personal point of view, I'm at the point that I'm also interested in, how do we build things together as a team, right? How do you tackle bigger projects, and especially working in a large code base, right? How do you balance, improving tech debt and, building features fast and all these sort of questions. So that's something I'm going to be learning in the following years.
React started out as a library for views, right? And now it's becoming larger and larger, so you have more tools on your belt. So you have like the React hooks, and you have Apollo GraphQL and Redux. So I don't know if people still use Redux or not, but do you think that the React ecosystem is gonna become it's gonna become the main ecosystem to be in? So if you wanna build any type of front end or even some back end stuff, are you gonna build with React and other tools related to React?
I think you're very right to call it an ecosystem, because it's not just React. I read somewhere that part of the success of React was maybe because it didn't try to solve too many problems at once. It was very much, the view part. And as a result, we've had innovations coming from other places like Redux and like Apollo, although GraphQL was created by Facebook. So I think that's probably a good thing. It brings strength to it, and the React team is able to incorporate some of these improvements. Whether there's any future for it on the back end, I have no clue. I don't see how right now, but who knows? I just think overall, there was this golden age of jQuery where, in a way, everyone was using jQuery and all the plugins were built for jQuery, and it just worked, right? And so if React can provide the same sort of paradigm, then that's great. If a new framework comes out that is so good that people are switching away from React to get to this new framework, then I guess I'll be happy with that as well, because it means something really cool and really much better will have emerged. But in the meantime, I'm happy to stick with React.
Cool.
Not to
Nice.
say that the other frameworks are bad. Like I've used Vue, I've used Angular,
Mhm.
but fuck there.
Great. So I'm gonna share Antoine LinkedIn in the description notes if you want to talk more about frontend, React, or masters,
Yeah,
master's
absolutely.
degree, or about joining Asana. Feel free to talk to him.
Yep.
And we always go to the React meetup in Vancouver, so
Yeah.
if you wanna meet us, just go to the React meetup.
Thank you so
Cool.
much for sharing all of that with us. It was a really good conversation, and yeah,
Same. A pleasure. My first podcast.
yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Antoine. And it was really good to listen to learn more about your experience and the stuff you've been doing. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, share this episode with your friends, and follow us in our social media. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and yeah, see you there.